Most people would walk right past this penny without a second thought. But what if I told you that one small detail on a 1982 Lincoln cent could mean the difference between 1 cent and hundreds, or even thousands of dollars? And the craziest part is, millions of people may already own one and have no idea. Today, we're diving into the story of the 1982 D Mint Mark Lincoln penny, a coin that sits at the center of one of the most fascinating transitions in U.S. coin history. This isn't just another old penny. It's a coin from a year when everything changed, when the U.S. Mint quietly altered how pennies were made, creating varieties that collectors still search for today. The 1982 D Lincoln penny was struck at the Denver Mint, which is why it carries the small d below the date on the front of the coin. It features the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln, first introduced in 1909, and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, a design that had been used since 1959. At first glance, it looks just like any other penny from the late 20th century. But in reality, this coin represents a turning point in American money. To understand why 1982 pennies matter so much, we need to go back to the economic pressures of the late 1970s and early 1980s. The price of copper was rising fast. In fact, it became so expensive that the metal inside a penny was sometimes worth more than the coin itself. That created a serious problem for the U.S. Mint. When it costs more than 1 cent to make a penny, the system stops making sense. For decades, pennies were made mostly of copper, about 95% copper with a small amount of zinc. These coins felt solid in the hand and had a warm, reddish tone. But by the early 1980s, copper prices were high enough that the mint had to act. So in 1982, they made a major decision. They switched the penny's metal composition from mostly copper to mostly zinc, coated with a thin layer of copper. And here's where the story gets exciting. Instead of switching cleanly at the start of the year, the mint made pennies in both compositions during 1982. That means there are copper pennies and zinc pennies from the same year. Even more interesting, the mint also changed the style of the date that year, producing both large date and small date varieties. And all of this happened at multiple mints, including Denver. As a result, 1982 became one of the most complex years in modern U.S. coinage. There are 7 major varieties of 1982 pennies, and collectors love trying to track them all down. The 1982 D Mint Mark penny plays a key role in this story, especially because some versions are common while others are surprisingly elusive. Let's talk about what makes the 1982 D penny unique. First, the metal. Some 1982 D pennies are made of copper and weigh about 3.11 grams. Others are made of zinc and weigh about 2.5 grams. That difference might sound small, but in the world of coin collecting, it's massive. It's one of the easiest ways to tell which type you have, simply by using a small digital scale. Second, the date style. The 2 in 1982 appears in 2 slightly different shapes. On the large date version, the numbers look thicker and more rounded, especially the 2, which curves gently at the base. On the small date version, the numbers are slimmer, and the 2 has a sharper, more pointed shape. These differences are subtle, but once you see them side by side, they become much easier to recognize. Now here's where the real mystery begins. While copper and zinc versions were both made in 1982 at the Philadelphia Mint, and Denver made large numbers of zinc pennies, something unusual happened with the small date copper version from Denver. According to official records, the Denver Mint was not supposed to strike any small date pennies in copper, yet collectors have searched for decades, hoping to find one. Why does that matter? Because if a genuine 1982 D small date copper penny were discovered, it would be one of the rarest modern U.S. coins in existence. We're talking about a coin that could potentially sell for tens of thousands of dollars or more, simply because it was never meant to exist. So far, no confirmed example has surfaced, which only adds to the legend. Some collectors believe one could be hiding in a jar of old change, unnoticed for decades. Others think it may never be found. But that possibility alone keeps people checking every 1982D penny they come across, just in case. Even among the confirmed varieties, the 1982D penny can still be valuable under the right conditions. Most circulated examples are worth just 1 cent, of course. But when you find them in uncirculated condition, meaning they were never used in everyday commerce and still have their original shine, values can rise quickly. High-grade examples, especially those certified by professional grading services, have sold for impressive amounts. Some 1982D zinc pennies in near-perfect condition have sold at auction for over $300. Copper versions in top grades can bring even more, sometimes reaching $500 or higher, depending on quality and demand. And then there are error coins, which add another layer of excitement. In 1982, during the transition between metals and dies, mistakes were bound to happen. Some pennies were struck off-center, leaving part of the design missing. Others show double strikes, where the coin was hit twice by the dies, creating a ghost-like doubling effect. There are also clipped planchets, where part of the coin blank was cut away before striking. These errors can dramatically increase value. A well-centered off-center strike from 1982D can sell for $50 to $150 or more. Dramatic errors can reach into the hundreds. And if someone ever finds a confirmed 1982D small date copper penny, it would instantly become a headline coin in the numismatic world. So how can you tell if your 1982D penny is something special? The first step is simple. Look for the mint mark. If there's a small D under the date, it was made in Denver. Next, examine the date style. Compare the shape of the numbers, especially the 2, to known examples of large and small date varieties. Many collectors keep reference photos on their phones for quick comparison. Then comes the most important test. Weight. Use a digital scale that measures to at least 2 decimal places. If your penny weighs about 3.11 grams, it's copper. If it weighs about 2.5 grams, it's zinc. This single step can instantly tell you which metal version you have. If you ever believe you've found something rare, especially a small date copper 1982D penny, don't clean it. Cleaning can destroy a coin's value. Instead, store it safely in a protective holder and consider having it authenticated by a professional coin grading service. That's the only way to know for sure what you're holding. When it comes to spotting fakes, most fake 1982D pennies involve altered dates or mint marks. Some people try to modify the date style or add a mint mark to a Philadelphia coin. Under magnification, these alterations usually look rough or uneven. The metal weight test also helps, since you can't easily fake a coin's composition without sophisticated equipment. One fun fact about 1982 pennies is that many people unknowingly have both copper and zinc versions in their change jars without realizing it. If you pick up 2 1982 pennies and drop them in your hand, you can sometimes feel the difference. The copper ones feel slightly heavier and more solid. It's a small detail, but once you notice it, you can't unfeel it. Another surprising detail is that 1982 is the last year U.S. pennies were made of mostly copper for circulation. Every penny made after that year is zinc-based with a copper coating. That makes 1982 the final chapter of the traditional copper penny era, a milestone in American coin history. Collectors also love the 1982D penny because it represents change, both literally and symbolically. It marks the moment when rising metal prices forced the mint to rethink something as basic as a 1-cent coin. It's a reminder that even the smallest pieces of money are shaped by global markets, economic pressures, and government decisions. For beginner collectors, the 1982D penny is often one of the first coins they learn to study closely. It teaches important skills like identifying date styles, weighing coins, and understanding metal composition. For advanced collectors, it offers a lifelong treasure hunt, especially with the ongoing mystery of the missing small-date copper Denver cent. Auction records show steady interest in high-grade 1982 pennies. Certified examples in top condition continue to attract strong bids, especially when they have sharp strikes, bright surfaces, and no visible wear. Even error coins from this year regularly outperform expectations, showing that demand for these transitional pennies remains strong. And then there's the dream scenario. Somewhere out there, in a piggy bank, a coffee can, or a forgotten coin jar in an attic, there could be a 1982 small-date copper penny waiting to be discovered. That possibility turns every ordinary-looking cent from this year into a potential treasure ticket. That's what makes this coin so powerful. It's not just about money. It's about curiosity, history, and the thrill of discovery. It's about realizing that something small and common can suddenly become rare and meaningful just because of a tiny detail most people overlook. The 1982 D. Lincoln penny tells a story of change, uncertainty, and innovation. It reminds us that even everyday objects can hold hidden stories and unexpected value. And it proves that you don't need ancient gold coins or rare silver dollars to experience the excitement of coin collecting. Sometimes all it takes is a penny. So the next time you see a 1982 penny, especially one with a little D under the date, don't toss it aside. Take a closer look. Check the date style. Weigh it. Because in that ordinary-looking coin, you might be holding a piece of history, a collector's prize, or maybe even the discovery of a lifetime. And who knows? The rarest modern penny ever found might already be sitting in someone's pocket, waiting for the moment they finally stop and look. Most people walk past pennies every day without a second thought. But what if one of those tiny copper coins in your drawer could quietly be worth far more than 1 cent? Today's story is about a simple-looking coin from the early 1980s that has surprised collectors for decades. The 1981 no-mint mark Lincoln penny. This coin is officially called the 1981 Lincoln Memorial Cent with no mint mark, which means it was made at the Philadelphia Mint. Unlike other U.S. coins, Philadelphia pennies didn't carry a mint mark during most of the 20th century, so the absence of a letter under the date actually tells us where it came from. At first glance, it looks ordinary. Abraham Lincoln's familiar portrait is on the front. The Lincoln Memorial is on the back. But beneath that familiar design is a story tied to one of the biggest changes in American coinage history. To understand this penny, we have to step back into the late 1970s and early 1980s. America was facing rising copper prices. The metal inside pennies was becoming more expensive than the coin itself, and the U.S. Mint had to make a difficult decision. Should they keep producing coins that cost more than a cent to make, or should they change the metal composition? By 1981, the Mint was deep into testing new materials. For decades, Lincoln pennies were made mostly of copper, but behind the scenes, engineers and Mint officials were preparing for a major shift. The following year, in 1982, the penny officially changed to a zinc core with a thin copper coating. That makes 1981 one of the very last years of traditional copper-based pennies. And that alone gives this coin a special place in American numismatic history. Every 1981 no-mint mark penny was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. That year, over 7.4 billion pennies were produced across all mints, and Philadelphia made a massive share of them. So in terms of sheer numbers, this coin is not rare. Millions were made, and many are still in circulation today. But as collectors know, rarity doesn't always come from how many coins were minted. Sometimes it comes from condition, sometimes it comes from errors, and sometimes it comes from small details that most people never notice. Let's take a closer look at what makes the 1981 no-mint mark penny unique. The coin features the classic Lincoln portrait designed by Victor David Brenner, first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Lincoln's birth. This design had already been in use for over 70 years by 1981. On the reverse, instead of wheat stalks, you'll see the Lincoln Memorial, which replaced the wheat design in 1959. Inside the memorial, if you look closely, you can actually see a tiny statue of Lincoln sitting between the columns, one of the smallest and most detailed elements ever placed on a circulating U.S. coin. Now let's talk about the metal. The 1981 penny is made of about 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin. This gives it a weight of around 3.11 grams. That weight matters because just 1 year later, pennies dropped to about 2.5 grams due to the new zinc core. That makes the 1981 penny part of the final generation of what collectors call true copper cents. To the average person, that difference might not matter, but to collectors, it's a dividing line between two eras of American money. The 1981 no-mint mark penny represents the closing chapter of the classic copper cent tradition that began in 1909. So if millions were made, why does anyone care about this coin today? The answer lies in condition and errors. Most 1981 pennies you'll find in circulation are worn, scratched, and dull brown. Those are worth exactly 1 cent. But coins that survived in pristine condition, especially those with full original luster and no visible wear, are far harder to find than people realize. In coin collecting, condition is everything. A coin that looks brand new can be worth dozens or even hundreds of times more than the same coin that has been lightly circulated. Then there are error coins. And this is where the 1981 no-mint mark penny becomes truly interesting. Some 1981 pennies were struck off-center, meaning the design appears shifted toward one side. Others show double die errors, where parts of the lettering or date appear doubled due to a misalignment during the die-making process. There are also clipped planchets, where part of the coin is missing because the metal strip was improperly cut before striking. And occasionally, collectors find broad strikes, where the coin was struck without a proper collar, causing it to spread wider than normal. Each of these errors transforms a common penny into something rare, unique, and valuable. One of the most talked about varieties for 1981 pennies is the double die obverse. These coins show doubling in the words liberty, in God we trust, or the date itself. To the naked eye, it can look like shadowing or blurriness, but under magnification, true doubling appears crisp and separated, not smeared. These coins are scarce, and collectors actively search for them. Now let's talk about real-world value. In everyday circulated condition, a 1981 no-mint mark penny is worth 1 cent. In lightly uncirculated condition, it might be worth 2 to 5 cents. But in top-tier mint state condition, coins graded MS67 or higher by professional grading services, prices rise dramatically. Some high-grade examples of 1981 Philadelphia pennies have sold for over $100 at auction, and in exceptional cases, even more. These coins are not valuable because of metal content or age. They're valuable because almost no one saved them in perfect condition, and finding one that looks exactly as it did the day it left the mint is extremely difficult. Error coins take the value even higher. Off-center strikes from 1981 have sold for $50 to $200, depending on how dramatic the error is. Broad strikes can bring $30 to $100. Double die varieties can sell for anywhere from $75 to several $100s, depending on strength and clarity of the doubling. Some rare error examples, especially in uncirculated condition, have crossed the $1,000 mark at major auctions. That means a penny most people would overlook could actually be worth more than a week's groceries, a month's phone bill, or even a plane ticket, all from a coin that once bought nothing more than a piece of candy. So how do you know if your 1981 no-mint mark penny is special? First, check the date. It should read 1981 and there should be no letter under the date. No D, no S, just the date. That confirms it was struck in Philadelphia. Next, weigh the coin if you can. A genuine 1981 copper penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. If it weighs closer to 2.5 grams, something is wrong, because zinc pennies weren't officially introduced until 1982. A lightweight 1981 penny could signal damage, alteration, or an unusual error, and in rare cases, it might be something worth investigating further. Then look closely at the surface. Use a magnifying glass or your phone camera zoomed in. Check the lettering on Liberty, "In God We Trust," and the numbers in the date. Look for doubling that looks sharp and separated, not blurry or smeared. Also examine the rim. If part of the design is missing or shifted, you might have an off-center strike or clipped planchet. Another important step is checking the edges. A genuine penny should have a smooth edge with no reading and no seam. If you see unusual seams or signs of plating, it may have been altered after leaving the mint. It's also worth knowing that counterfeit pennies are extremely rare because there's little incentive to fake a 1-cent coin. However, altered coins do exist, especially when someone tries to modify dates or plate copper coins to imitate rarer varieties. That's why weight, metal composition, and microscopic details matter. If you think you found something unusual, avoid cleaning the coin. Cleaning almost always lowers a coin's value by removing original surfaces and creating scratches that grading services can easily detect. Instead, store it in a protective holder and consider having it evaluated by a professional coin dealer or a grading service. Now let's talk about some fun and surprising facts about the 1981 penny. In 1981 alone, Americans used pennies for almost everything. Parking meters, candy machines, newspaper boxes, arcade games, pay phones, all relied on small change. That means the 1981 penny passed through countless hands during a time when cash was still king. It traveled through grocery stores, gas stations, school lunch lines, and jukeboxes. Each coin has its own invisible history. Another interesting detail is that many collectors consider 1981 pennies part of the last copper era, even though technically copper pennies continued into early 1982. But 1981 represents the final full year before the massive material change, making it emotionally symbolic in U.S. coin history. Also, the Lincoln Memorial reverse would only last another 27 years. In 2009, it was replaced with new Lincoln designs, and later the Union Shield reverse. That means the 1981 penny sits comfortably within the long middle chapter of the Lincoln Memorial series, a design that ran from 1959 to 2008 and became one of the most recognizable coins in American pockets. Collectors also love the 1981 penny because it's accessible. You don't need thousands of dollars to start collecting Lincoln cents. You can begin with pocket change, old jars, or inherited collections. And every once in a while, someone finds a rare variety or high-grade example in an unexpected place, proving that treasure hunting doesn't always require metal detectors or ancient maps. Sometimes it just requires curiosity and a magnifying glass. Another surprising fact is how difficult it is to find perfect 1981 pennies today. Even though billions were made, almost none were saved in pristine condition. Most were immediately used in circulation, where they were scratched, worn, and dulled within months. That's why mint state examples command such strong premiums. Survival, not mintage, creates rarity. Collectors also enjoy searching for subtle differences between dies, minting styles, and strike qualities from different presses. Even within a single year and mint, no two coins are truly identical. Each die ages differently, strikes slightly differently, and leaves behind its own fingerprint on the metal. So why do collectors still care about the 1981 no-mint mark penny today? Because it represents a turning point. It stands at the edge of two eras, the end of solid copper cents and the beginning of modern zinc-based coinage. It connects the classic past of American coinage to the modern present. And while it may look ordinary, It hides stories of economic change, industrial adaptation, and millions of everyday transactions that shaped daily life in the early 1980s. It's also a reminder that value isn't always obvious. Sometimes the most unassuming objects carry the most interesting stories. A penny that once bought a stick of gum can later become a prized collectible, simply because time, history, and scarcity changed its meaning. For many collectors, finding a high-grade 1981 penny or a rare error variety feels like discovering a hidden message from the past, proof that even common coins can hold uncommon secrets. And maybe the most powerful part of this story is that this coin is still out there. It could be sitting in your spare change jar. It could be tucked into an old drawer. It could be resting at the bottom of a forgotten piggy bank. Most people would never look twice, but now you know better. So the next time you see a penny dated 1981 with no mint mark, don't dismiss it. Turn it over, look closely, weigh it, study the details. Because that small copper disc might not just be spare change. It might be a surviving piece of the final chapter of America's copper penny era, quietly waiting for someone to recognize its story. And who knows, the most valuable coin you'll ever own might already be in your pocket. Imagine pulling a single penny from your pocket and discovering it might be worth far more than 1 cent. Not because it's gold, not because it's ancient, but because of a tiny letter beneath Lincoln's date. Today, we're uncovering the story of the 1979 D. Lincoln penny, a coin millions of people owned, yet very few ever truly noticed. The 1979 D. Lincoln penny is a 1 cent coin struck at the Denver Mint, identified by the small letter D below the year on the front. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary penny, the kind you've probably handled thousands of times. But behind this simple copper-colored coin is a fascinating story of American history, changing metal, hidden errors, and surprising collector value that still captures attention today. To understand this coin, we need to step back into the late 1970s. America was going through major economic changes. Inflation was rising, metal prices were climbing, and the U.S. Mint was under pressure to keep producing billions of coins without losing money. By 1979, pennies were still being made mostly from copper, just as they had been for decades, but the rising cost of copper was becoming a serious problem. The Lincoln cent itself has a much longer story. It was first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. It became the first U.S. coin to feature a real person instead of a symbolic figure. By 1979, Lincoln had already appeared on the penny for 70 years, making him one of the most recognizable faces in American history. The design on the front, created by sculptor Victor David Brenner, remained largely unchanged. On the back, the familiar Lincoln Memorial design, introduced in 1959, was still in use. In 1979, the Denver Mint struck over 4 billion pennies. That number alone tells us something important. This was not a rare coin when it was released. It was everywhere. It passed through grocery stores, gas stations, vending machines, school lunch lines, and tip jars across the country. Millions of Americans carried this coin without ever thinking twice about it. But what makes the 1979 D penny interesting isn't how common it once was. It's what happened to certain examples over time, and how collectors began noticing unusual details that turned ordinary cents into desirable finds. Let's talk about the physical features first. The 1979 D Lincoln penny is made of 95% copper and 5% zinc. It weighs about 3.11 grams and measures 19 millimeters across. The front shows Abraham Lincoln facing to the right, with the words "In God We Trust" above his head, "Liberty" to the left, and the date with the mint mark below. On the back, you'll see the Lincoln Memorial Building, with the words "United States of America" across the top, 1 cent at the bottom, and "E pluribus unum" above the memorial. If you look closely, you can even see a tiny statue of Lincoln sitting inside the memorial, making this one of the few U.S. coins that shows the same person on both sides. Most 1979 D pennies look exactly like this, but some don't, and that's where the story gets exciting. Collectors search coins for what are called errors and varieties. These are small mistakes made during the minting process that create differences in the design, lettering, or metal composition. While most mistakes are caught and destroyed, some escape into circulation. When they do, they can become highly valuable, especially decades later when fewer remain. One of the most interesting varieties linked to 1979 Lincoln cents involves something called a wide date and narrow date. This difference isn't always obvious at first glance, but once you know what to look for, it becomes clear. In wide date versions, the numbers in the year appear more spread out, especially the space between the 9 and the 7. In narrow date versions, the digits are closer together. While this variety is more famous on Philadelphia coins, collectors still examine Denver minted cents closely because subtle spacing and design differences can affect value. Another thing collectors watch for is doubling, especially on the date and lettering. This happens when the coin is struck slightly off during production, creating a shadow-like second image. Some 1979 D pennies show what's known as double die errors, where parts of the design appear doubled due to a mistake in the die itself. These can be difficult to spot without magnification, but when genuine examples surface, they can sell for significantly more than face value. There are also off-center strikes, clipped planchets, and wrong metal errors. Occasionally, a penny might be struck on a blank mint for another coin, or the metal disc might be incomplete. These mistakes are rare, but when found, they attract serious collector interest. So why would a penny worth 1 cent suddenly sell for dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of dollars? It all comes down to condition, rarity, and demand. Most 1979 D pennies today are worn from decades of circulation. But coins that were saved early, never spent, and preserved in near-perfect condition are far harder to find. Collectors use a grading scale from 1 to 70 to describe a coin's condition, with higher numbers meaning better preservation. Coins graded 65 or higher are considered gem quality. A 1979 D penny in average circulated condition might be worth only 1 or 2 cents. But a mint-state example with sharp details, full original luster, and no damage can sell for several dollars. And if the coin also has a recognized error or variety, the value can climb much higher. There have been auction examples where top-grade 1979 D pennies sold for impressive prices. Certified coins graded in near-perfect condition have reached into the hundreds of dollars. Error examples, especially those with dramatic doubling or unusual strikes, have sold for even more, sometimes approaching 4 figures. These prices might sound surprising for a coin that once bought a piece of candy or helped complete a purchase at the register. But this is how collecting works. What was once ordinary becomes special when time removes most examples from pristine condition. If you're wondering whether you might own a valuable 1979 D penny, the first step is learning how to identify a real one. Start by checking the front of the coin. Below the year, you should see a small D that confirms it was struck at the Denver Mint. If there's no letter, it was made in Philadelphia. If you see an S, it came from San Francisco. Next, look at the overall condition. Is the coin shiny with sharp details? Or is it dull and worn? Check Lincoln's hair, cheek, and coat lines. On the back, look at the steps of the memorial and the lettering. The clearer these features are, the higher the potential value. Now look closely at the date and lettering. Use a magnifying glass or phone camera. Do the numbers look doubled or unusually thick? Does any part of the design appear shifted or incomplete? These could be signs of an error coin. Weight is another helpful clue. A normal 1979 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. If it's significantly lighter or heavier, it might have been struck on the wrong type of metal blank, which is rare but valuable. As for counterfeits, They are uncommon for modern pennies like this, but altered coins do exist. Sometimes people try to change mint marks or modify dates. A real 1979 D penny will show natural wear patterns and proper spacing between the date and mint mark. If something looks off, it's worth having the coin checked by a professional grading service or experienced coin dealer. One fun fact about the 1979 penny is that it represents the final years of traditional copper cents. Just 3 years later, in 1982, the U.S. Mint switched to mostly zinc with a thin copper coating to reduce costs. That makes the 1979 D penny part of the last generation of classic copper Lincoln cents, giving it historical significance beyond just its face value. Another surprising detail is how many people unknowingly saved these coins. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, rumors spread that pennies might stop being made, or that copper coins would become valuable because of metal prices. As a result, many Americans began setting aside rolls of cents, including 1979 D examples. Most of those rolls still sit in drawers, jars, and boxes today, waiting to be rediscovered. Collectors also enjoy the 1979 D penny because it's accessible. Unlike rare gold coins or early American copper that cost thousands of dollars just to enter the hobby, this coin is easy to find and affordable to collect. You can build a high-quality collection of Lincoln cents by searching pocket change, coin rolls from banks, or inherited collections. But even more than that, collectors love the stories these coins carry. Each penny passed through countless hands. It might have been used to buy a newspaper, dropped into a wishing well, saved by a child, or forgotten in a desk drawer. When you hold a 1979 D penny, you're holding a small piece of everyday American life from over 4 decades ago. Some collectors focus on building full daytime mintmark sets of Lincoln cents, and the 1979 D is a key piece of that puzzle. Others specialize in errors and varieties, searching for that one unusual coin hiding among thousands of ordinary ones. And some people simply enjoy the thrill of discovery, the idea that something valuable might be hiding in plain sight. What makes the 1979 D penny especially appealing is that it sits at the crossroads between modern and classic coinage. It's old enough to feel historical, yet recent enough to be familiar. It's common enough to find, yet rare enough in top condition to be exciting. It's simple, humble, and quietly fascinating. So the next time you come across a penny from the late 1970s, take a closer look. Turn it over in your hand. Check the date. Look for that small D, study the lettering. You might just find something special hiding in the smallest denomination of U.S. currency. Because sometimes, history isn't locked in museums or buried in vaults. Sometimes, it's sitting in your pocket, waiting for you to notice. And that's the real magic of coins like the 1979 D Lincoln penny. It reminds us that even the most ordinary objects can carry extraordinary stories, and that curiosity alone can turn loose change into something far more valuable than money. So keep looking, keep learning, and who knows, the next time you hear the soft clink of a penny hitting the table, it just might be the sound of discovery. What if I told you that a penny you've probably held in your hand before could be worth hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars, and most people spend it without ever knowing? Today's story is about one of the most fascinating modern Lincoln cents ever made, the 1972 no mint mark penny. This coin looks ordinary at first glance. Just another brown copper penny with Abraham Lincoln on the front and the Lincoln Memorial on the back. But behind that familiar design is one of the most famous minting mistakes in U.S. coin history, a rare error that has turned simple pocket change into serious collector treasure. Let's start with what this coin actually is. The 1972 no mint mark Lincoln penny was made at the Philadelphia Mint. During this time, Philadelphia coins did not carry a mint mark, so the absence of a letter under the date is completely normal. Millions of these pennies were produced, and most are only worth face value today. But hidden among them are a small number of dramatic error coins that have become legendary in the coin collecting world. To understand why this coin exists, we need to go back to the early 1970s. America was going through big changes. The Vietnam War was winding down, inflation was rising, and the cost of producing coins was becoming a serious issue for the U.S. Mint. Copper prices were climbing, but pennies were still being made mostly of copper, using a metal composition of about 95% copper and 5% zinc. That gave the 1972 penny its warm brown color and solid feel, heavier than today's zinc pennies. The Lincoln cent design itself had already been around for over 60 years by 1972. Abraham Lincoln had first appeared on the penny in 1909, marking the 100th anniversary of his birth. By the early 1970s, the reverse side featured the Lincoln Memorial, introduced in 1959. Inside the memorial, if you look closely, you can even see a tiny statue of Lincoln sitting in his chair. It's one of the most detailed designs ever placed on a circulating U.S. coin. In 1972, the Philadelphia Mint produced more than 2 billion pennies. Yes, billion with a B, that makes the regular 1972 penny extremely common. Most examples today are worth 1 or 2 cents unless they are in unusually perfect condition. But this massive production run also created the perfect conditions for one of the most famous mint errors in U.S. history. This brings us to what makes the 1972 no mint mark penny truly special. Some of these coins were struck using a misaligned die that caused dramatic doubling across the entire front of the coin. This is known as a double die obverse, and the 1972 version is one of the strongest and most obvious doubling errors ever discovered on a Lincoln cent. On these rare error coins, the date, the word liberty, and the motto "In God We Trust" appear clearly doubled, almost like a shadow image behind the letters. This is not wear, damage, or postman tampering. This doubling happened at the moment the die itself was created, meaning every coin struck from that die carries the same dramatic error. Unlike subtle doubled dies that require magnification to detect, the 1972 doubled die penny can often be spotted with the naked eye. That's one reason collectors love it, and one reason it remains one of the most searched-for coins in everyday change. But how rare is it, really? Out of the more than 2 billion pennies minted in Philadelphia that year, only an estimated 20,000 to 30,000 double die examples are believed to exist. That may sound like a lot, but in the world of coin collecting, it's incredibly small, and many of those have already been lost, damaged, or spent over the decades. This rarity, combined with how dramatic and easy to see the doubling is, has made the 1972 double die penny one of the most famous error coins in American history. It's often compared to the legendary 1955 double die penny, but many collectors actually consider the 1972 version even more impressive visually. Now let's talk about real money. In average circulated condition, a genuine 1972 double die penny can sell for $300 to $600. In better condition, especially coins with strong detail and minimal wear, prices rise quickly into the $1,000 to $2,000 range. But it doesn't stop there. High-grade examples certified by professional grading services have sold for far more. Some pristine examples graded mint state 65 or higher have reached prices between $3,000 and $5,000 at major auctions. Exceptional specimens with sharp doubling and full original luster have even crossed the $10,000 mark, all from a coin that originally cost just 1 cent. Meanwhile, regular 1972 no mint mark pennies without the doubling are common. In circulated condition, they're typically worth face value. In uncirculated condition, they may sell for 25 to 75 cents, and only the very finest examples reach a few dollars. So the difference between ordinary and extraordinary comes down to one critical detail: doubling. So how can you tell if you might have the real thing? Start with the date. On a genuine 1972 doubled die penny, the 1972 will appear doubled clearly to the naked eye, with the numbers looking thick, split, or shadowed. Next, check the word Liberty on the left side of Lincoln's portrait. On true doubled dies, each letter will show strong separation, not just fuzziness or thickness. Then look at In God We Trust along the top. On genuine examples, the letters appear doubled and well-defined, not blurry. The key is that the doubling should look like two distinct images slightly offset from each other, not smearing or damage. It's important to know that many normal pennies develop machine doubling or worn die doubling, which looks flat, shelf-like, and not raised like real doubled die lettering. Those coins are not valuable. Only true doubled die coins, caused by misaligned hub impressions during die creation, carry serious collector value. If you believe you found one, the best step is to have it authenticated by a professional grading service. This protects you from selling a valuable coin unknowingly and ensures buyers trust its authenticity. Now here's where things get really interesting. Most of the known 1972 doubled die pennies were discovered in the early 1970s by collectors searching through bank rolls. Back then, people could buy rolls of pennies directly from banks and search through thousands of coins for rare errors. Many collectors still remember the excitement of finding their first doubled die penny, often right in their own kitchen or at the local coin shop. What makes this story even more fascinating is that a few examples are still occasionally found in circulation today. It's rare, but not impossible. Every year, stories surface of people discovering one in an old coin jar, inherited collection, or forgotten piggy bank. And that's what makes this coin so magical. It reminds us that treasure doesn't always come from shipwrecks or buried chests. Sometimes, it's hiding in plain sight in a drawer, a jar, or a pocket. Here's a fun fact. The Lincoln Memorial reverse design includes Lincoln himself sitting inside the building. That makes this penny the only regular U.S. coin in circulation that shows the same person on both sides of the coin. Most people never notice this detail, even after handling thousands of pennies. Another interesting detail is that 1972 pennies were among the last made with nearly pure copper. Just 10 years later, in 1982, the mint switched to zinc-based pennies with a thin copper coating to save money. That means your 1972 penny contains nearly 3 cents worth of copper at modern metal prices, more than its face value, though melting coins is illegal. Collectors also love this coin because it represents a turning point in modern era collecting. Before famous errors like the 1955 and 1972 doubled die pennies, many people didn't take error coins seriously. But these dramatic mistakes proved that mint errors could be valuable, historical, and collectible, not just damaged coins. The 1972 doubled die penny helped launch an entire generation of collectors into the hobby. It became a gateway coin, something exciting enough to make people start searching their change and learning about minting, history, and value. And the appeal isn't just financial. There's something powerful about holding a small copper coin that tells a bigger story. It connects you to the machinery of the U.S. Mint, the economy of the early 1970s, and the idea that even large institutions can make mistakes that become valuable pieces of history. Even regular 1972 no-mint mark pennies have meaning. They're part of the final years of solid copper cents, struck during a time of economic uncertainty, rising inflation, and change in American manufacturing. They circulated through hands during the Watergate era, the moon landings, and the early days of modern America. But the double die version, that's where legend begins. It's one of the most dramatic examples of how tiny imperfections can create massive value. A simple misalignment during die creation produced coins now worth thousands of dollars, and most people who handled them at the time had no idea. That's why collectors love this coin today. It combines accessibility with rarity. It's modern enough that examples still exist in everyday collections, but rare enough to feel like a genuine discovery when found. It's easy to identify, visually striking, historically important, and financially meaningful. It checks every box that collectors look for. And perhaps most importantly, it gives people hope. Hope that the next coin they check might be special. Hope that something overlooked could turn out to be extraordinary. Hope that history is closer than we think, sometimes just one pocket away. So the next time you see a 1972 penny without a mint mark, don't dismiss it. Look closely at the date. Look at the lettering. Take a second to examine what you're holding. Because in rare cases, that ordinary-looking coin could be one of the most famous error pennies ever made. A piece of American minting history worth far more than 1 cent. And who knows, the next legendary 1972 double-die discovery might already be sitting in someone's change jar right now, waiting to be noticed. Most people have walked past this coin their entire lives without realizing one of them could be worth far more than 1 cent. A penny from 1971, sitting quietly in pocket change, dresser drawers, and old jars, has surprised collectors again and again. And today, you're about to find out why. The coin we're talking about is the 1971 Lincoln penny with no mint mark. It looks ordinary at first glance, just another copper-colored cent with Abraham Lincoln's face on the front. But behind that simple design is a fascinating story, hidden details, and a few rare versions that can turn an everyday coin into something truly special. Let's start with what this coin actually is. The 1971 no mint mark Lincoln penny was struck at the Philadelphia Mint. Back then, pennies made in Philadelphia usually did not carry a mint mark, so the space under the date is blank. Millions of these coins were produced, and they circulated widely across the United States. People used them to buy candy, newspapers, and phone calls, never imagining that some of these cents would one day become collectibles. The year 1971 was a turning point in American history. The United States was deep into social change, technology was advancing fast, and the economy was shifting. Coin production reflected that era of transition. The Lincoln cent had already been around for more than 60 years by then. First introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. By 1971, the design was familiar, trusted, and symbolic of everyday American life. On the front of the coin, you see Lincoln's profile facing right, designed by sculptor Victor David Brenner. Above his head is the word Liberty, and to the right is the date, 1971. Behind Lincoln's shoulder is the phrase, "In God We Trust." The design had stayed mostly unchanged for decades, which made the penny one of the most recognizable coins in the world. On the back, the design features the Lincoln Memorial, which replaced the wheat stalks design in 1959. Inside the memorial, if you look closely, you can actually see a tiny statue of Lincoln seated in the center. That detail is so small it can't be seen without magnification, but it's one of the most interesting features of modern pennies. Above the memorial are the words United States of America, and below it is 1 cent, with E pluribus unum at the top. Now let's talk about what makes the 1971 no mint mark penny unique. First, it's made mostly of copper. At that time, pennies were composed of 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin. Just a year later, rising copper prices would push the U.S. Mint to rethink the metal composition of cents. That means the 1971 penny belongs to the last generation of classic heavy copper Lincoln cents. When you hold one, it feels slightly heavier and more solid than modern pennies. Another unique feature is how sharply detailed many of these coins were struck. In the early 1970s, minting technology was improving, and some 1971 pennies show crisp lettering, strong details in Lincoln's hair, and clean lines on the Lincoln Memorial. Well-preserved examples can look almost new, even after decades. But here's where things get interesting. While most 1971 no-mint mark pennies are common, a small number were struck with errors or unusual characteristics. These rare mistakes are what turn ordinary coins into collectibles worth real money. One of the most sought-after varieties is the double die obverse. This happens when the coin die shifts slightly during the minting process, causing parts of the design to appear doubled. On some 1971 pennies, collectors have found doubling in the date, the word Liberty, and even in Lincoln's profile. These are not the same as damage or wear. True double die coins show clear, rounded doubling that looks like a shadow or echo of the original design. Another valuable error is the off-center strike. This happens when the coin blank is not properly aligned during minting, causing part of the design to be missing and part of the metal to remain blank. Off-center 1971 pennies that still show the full date can be worth significantly more than face value, especially if the strike is dramatic. There are also clipped planchet errors, where a piece of metal was missing from the coin blank before it was struck. This leaves a curved or straight missing section on the edge of the coin. If genuine, these errors are highly collectible and can add serious value to an otherwise ordinary cent. Some 1971 pennies were also struck on the wrong type of metal, although these are extremely rare. For example, a penny accidentally struck on a foreign coin blank or another denomination's planchet can be worth thousands of dollars if authenticated. So why is the 1971 no-mint mark penny considered valuable at all, when millions were made? The answer lies in condition and rarity within that massive population. Most of these pennies were heavily circulated, scratched, darkened, and worn. But a small number survived in near-perfect condition, especially coins that were pulled from rolls or saved by collectors at the time. High-grade examples, especially those graded by professional services, can command surprisingly strong prices. A standard 1971 no-mint mark penny in average circulated condition is usually worth only 1 to 3 cents. But in uncirculated condition, the value jumps. Coins graded in top condition, especially those with deep red copper color and sharp details, can sell for tens or even hundreds of dollars. Now let's look at real auction examples. In recent years, uncirculated 1971 no-mint mark pennies graded at the highest levels have sold for over $100, sometimes more depending on eye appeal and demand. A high-quality doubled die example can bring several $100s, and in rare cases, over $1,000. Error coins can go even higher. A strong off-center strike or a dramatic clipped planchet 1971 penny can sell for anywhere from $50 to several $100s. And if a wrong planchet example appears, prices can climb into the thousands, especially if the error is confirmed by a reputable grading service. These results may sound surprising, especially for a coin that most people still see as pocket change. But in the world of coin collecting, rarity within condition and error type matters more than how many coins were originally made. So how can you tell if you have a valuable 1971 no-mint mark penny? First, check for the mint mark. If there's no letter under the date, it was struck in Philadelphia, which is exactly what we're looking for. Then, examine the date and lettering closely using a magnifying glass or phone camera zoom. Look for doubling, especially in the numbers 1971, the word Liberty, and the phrase "In God We Trust." True double die coins show clear separation between the letters, not blurry shadows. Next, look at the edges and shape of the coin. Is it perfectly round, or does it appear clipped or off-center? Check whether part of the design is missing or unusually positioned. These signs may point to a mint error. Then consider the color and surface. A valuable example often has bright red or reddish-orange copper color with very little wear. Scratches, dark spots, or dull brown surfaces usually lower value. The sharper Lincoln's hair details and facial features appear, the better the condition. Also check the weight. Most people have spent a 1967 penny without a second thought. But what if I told you that some of these everyday coins are now worth hundreds, even thousands of dollars, and many people still have them sitting unnoticed in jars, drawers, and old wallets right now? Today, we're diving into the story of the 1967 no-mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that looks ordinary, feels ordinary, and yet carries a fascinating history, hidden rarity, and real collector demand. This is the kind of coin that proves treasure doesn't always glitter. Sometimes, it hides in plain copper. The 1967 Lincoln penny is part of the famous Lincoln cent series, which began in 1909 to honor President Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday. By 1967, the design had already been in circulation for nearly 6 decades, and millions of Americans used these pennies every single day. What makes this coin interesting is not just its age, but the moment in history when it was made, and the unusual choices the U.S. Mint made during that time. In 1967, the United States was facing a nationwide coin shortage. People were hoarding coins, especially silver ones, as metal prices rose and confidence in paper money fluctuated. Everyday change was disappearing from circulation. Stores struggled to make transactions, and vending machines often ran out of coins. To fix the problem, the U.S. government took dramatic action. One of the biggest changes was the temporary removal of mint marks from coins. From 1965 through 1967, the U.S. Mint stopped placing mint marks on most coins, including pennies, in an effort to discourage collectors from hoarding them based on where they were made. The idea was simple. If coins all looked the same, people would stop pulling them from circulation. As a result, every 1967 Lincoln penny was made without a mint mark, no matter which mint produced it. Most of these pennies were struck in Philadelphia, which traditionally did not use mint marks on cents anyway. But Denver and San Francisco also produced pennies that year, and none of them carry a mint mark. That alone makes 1967 a unique year in modern U.S. coin history. And it's one of the few times in American history when all circulating coins lacked mint marks across multiple mints. The coin itself features the familiar portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the front, designed by Victor David Brenner. Lincoln faces to the right, with the words "In God We Trust" above his head, "Liberty" to the left, and the date 1967 to the right. The design is clean, balanced, and instantly recognizable to generations of Americans. On the reverse, the coin displays the Lincoln Memorial, a design introduced in 1959. If you look closely, you can even see a tiny statue of Lincoln seated inside the memorial, making this one of the few U.S. coins to show the same person on both sides. The words "United States of America" appear across the top, 1 cent across the bottom, and "E pluribus unum" above the memorial. In terms of metal, the 1967 penny is made of 95% copper and 5% zinc. This is important because it places the coin firmly in the era of solid copper cents. In 1982, the U.S. Mint switched to copper-plated zinc pennies, which are lighter and contain far less copper. Because of this, older pennies like the 1967 are heavier, richer in color, and more appealing to collectors, and to anyone interested in metal value alone. Each 1967 penny weighs about 3.11 grams and measures 19 millimeters in diameter. But what really sets this coin apart isn't just its design or metal. It's what happened during the minting process that year. Because the U.S. Mint was rushing to produce massive quantities of coins to ease the shortage, quality control was sometimes stretched thin. This created the perfect conditions for minting errors. And error coins are some of the most valuable collectibles in the hobby. One of the most famous errors found on 1967 pennies is the double die obverse. This happens when the die used to strike the coin receives a misaligned impression during its creation, causing parts of the design, especially the date or lettering, to appear doubled. On genuine doubled die coins, the doubling is crisp and visible under magnification. not flat or blurry. Some 1967 double-die pennies have sold for hundreds to thousands of dollars, depending on condition and strength of doubling. The most dramatic examples show clear doubling in the words "In God We Trust" and the date itself. Another valuable error is the off-center strike. This occurs when the blank coin planchet is not properly seated in the press, causing part of the design to be missing. Off-center 1967 pennies showing 10 to 50% of the design off the edge can command strong prices, especially if the date is still visible. There are also clipped planchets, where part of the metal blank was improperly cut before striking, leaving a curved or straight missing section. These errors look dramatic and unusual, and collectors love them because they are easy to recognize and visually striking. Then there are die cracks and cut errors, where damage to the die creates raised lines or blobs of metal on the coin's surface. While small cracks may only add minor value, large and dramatic ones can significantly boost a coin's worth. Now let's talk about rarity, because most people assume that if a coin was produced in large numbers, it can't be valuable. In 1967, over 3 billion Lincoln pennies were minted. That's an enormous number, one of the highest mintages in U.S. history. So yes, in average circulated condition, a typical 1967 penny is usually worth just a few cents. But here's the twist. Condition is everything. High-grade examples of this coin, especially those with full original luster and no signs of wear, are surprisingly difficult to find. Most were used heavily during the late 1960s and 1970s, when cash transactions dominated everyday life. Pennies were tossed into registers, dropped on sidewalks, and scraped across countless surfaces. As a result, pristine examples that look almost brand new are far scarcer than the original mintage numbers suggest. In professional coin grading, pennies are evaluated on a scale from 1 to 70. Coins graded MS, meaning mint state, have never been circulated. Among those, coins graded M-67 or higher are extremely rare for the 1967 penny, and when they do appear at auction, collectors compete aggressively. In recent years, certified 1967 Lincoln pennies graded M-67 red, meaning they retain full original copper color, have sold for several $100s. Some exceptional examples have crossed the $1,000 mark, depending on eye appeal, strike quality, and surface preservation. And error coins, of course, can go much higher. A strong double-die 1967 penny in high grade can sell for anywhere from $1,000 to over $5,000. Off-center strikes and dramatic mint errors regularly bring prices in the hundreds, sometimes more. These prices may sound shocking for a coin that once bought a stick of gum, but that's exactly what makes coin collecting exciting. Value isn't about face value. It's about history, rarity, condition, and demand. So how can you tell if you have a valuable 1967 penny? First, check the date. It must read 1967. Then confirm there is no mint mark below the date. That's normal for this year, so the absence of a mint mark doesn't automatically mean it's rare, but it confirms you're looking at the right issue. Next, look at the coin's condition. Does it still shine with bright reddish color? Are Lincoln's cheekbones sharp and smooth? Do the letters look crisp and full? If your coin looks dull, dark, or heavily scratched, it's likely worth only face value or a small premium. Then, use a magnifying glass or phone camera to examine the date and lettering closely. Look for doubling in the numbers, especially the 1 and 9 in 1967, and in the words "In God We Trust." True double-die coins show separation lines and rounded doubling, not flat shadows or blurry edges. Also inspect the rim and edges. Is the coin centered properly? Does any part of the design appear cut off? Is there a curved or straight missing section? These could indicate off-center strikes or clipped planchets. If you believe you found something unusual, the next step is to compare it with verified examples online or consult a professional coin dealer or grading service. Never clean the coin, as cleaning can destroy its value instantly, even if the coin is rare. As for fakes, counterfeit pennies are uncommon because the face value is so low. However, altered coins do exist. Some people attempt to create fake doubled dies by damaging the coin's surface or re-engraving details. Real doubled die coins will show smooth, natural doubling, not rough or jagged lines. Also, weight matters. A genuine 1967 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. Anything significantly off could indicate tampering. One surprising fact about the 1967 penny is that it was one of the last years when pennies were truly made for circulation in massive numbers and used heavily in daily life. After the 1970s, inflation slowly reduced the purchasing power of the penny, and its role in everyday transactions began to shrink. That makes coins like the 1967 cent a snapshot of a time when even a single cent still mattered. Another interesting detail is that 1967 was the final year of the no mint mark policy. In 1968, mint marks returned to U.S. coins, ending this unusual 3-year experiment. That gives 1967 a special place in modern numismatic history, representing both the end of a crisis period and the return to normal minting practices. Collectors also appreciate this coin because it belongs to the last generation of full copper Lincoln cents before major metal changes reshaped American coinage. In just over a decade, the copper penny would disappear, replaced by cheaper materials, making coins like the 1967 cent part of a closed chapter in U.S. minting. So why do collectors love this coin today? First, it's accessible. Almost anyone can find a 1967 penny in old jars, rolls, or inherited collections. That sense of possibility, that you might already own something valuable, fuels excitement and curiosity. Second, it offers real upside. While most examples are common, the right combination of condition and rarity can turn a 1-cent coin into a 4-figure collectible. Third, it tells a story. This penny isn't just metal. It's a physical reminder of a time when Americans worried about shortages, hoarded coins, and watched the nation adapt to economic change. It's history you can hold in your hand. And finally, it rewards careful observation. The more closely you look, the more you learn. A tiny doubling here, a slight misalignment there. These small details can transform an ordinary object into something extraordinary. That sense of discovery is what keeps collectors searching, sorting, and examining every coin that passes through their hands. Right now, somewhere in the country, a 1967 doubled die penny is sitting unnoticed in a jar, drawer, or coffee can. Someone might spend it tomorrow without realizing it could have paid a utility bill, a weekend getaway, or more. And that's what makes coins like this so fascinating. They remind us that value isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's hiding in the smallest details. So the next time you come across an old penny, especially one dated 1967, don't rush past it. Hold it up to the light. Look closely at the letters, the numbers, the edges. You might be holding nothing more than a cent, or you might be holding a quiet piece of American history with a story and a value far greater than its face suggests. And who knows? The next time you hear that familiar clink of copper in your pocket, it just might be the sound of hidden treasure waiting to be discovered. What if the penny sitting quietly in your pocket change right now was secretly worth far more than 1 cent? Today, we're uncovering the surprising story behind the 1964 no mint mark Lincoln penny, a coin that looks ordinary at first glance but carries a hidden history that still excites collectors more than 60 years later. This coin is known officially as the 1964 Lincoln Memorial Cent, with no mint mark, meaning it was made at the Philadelphia Mint. Millions of Americans have handled this penny without ever realizing how unusual its timing, metal composition, and rare errors make certain examples incredibly valuable today. While most are common, a small number have sold for astonishing prices, and that's why this humble penny continues to spark curiosity. To understand this coin, we have to go back to 1964, a year filled with change and uncertainty in the United States. President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated just months earlier. The civil rights movement was reshaping the nation, and Americans were saving coins at record levels. People were pulling silver coins out of circulation, worried that rising metal prices would soon make them more valuable than their face value. As a result, the country faced a serious coin shortage. The U.S. Mint was under pressure to produce massive quantities of coins as quickly as possible. In 1964 alone, the Philadelphia Mint struck over 2.6 billion Lincoln pennies, one of the highest production totals in American history. These pennies were meant to keep everyday commerce moving, not to become collectibles. And yet, over time, this year became one of the most talked about dates in modern Lincoln cent collecting. The design of the 1964 penny looks familiar to anyone who's ever seen a modern cent. On the front, or obverse, is Abraham Lincoln's portrait, first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of his birth. The words "In God We Trust" appear along the top, Liberty is on the left, and the date 1964 sits on the right. Because there is no mint mark beneath the date, this penny came from Philadelphia. On the reverse side, you'll find the Lincoln Memorial, a design that had been in use since 1959. Inside the memorial, if you look closely, you can actually see a tiny statue of Lincoln seated between the columns. It's one of the few times in U.S. coinage history that the same person appears on both sides of a coin. Now let's talk about what makes the 1964 penny especially interesting. First, its metal composition. This coin is made of 95% copper and 5% tin and zinc, giving it a warm, reddish tone when freshly minted. These are often called bronze cents, and collectors love them because copper prices have risen dramatically over the years. While modern pennies are mostly zinc, the 1964 cent represents the final era of classic copper Lincoln cents. Most 1964 pennies are worth only a few cents today in circulated condition, but certain examples are worth much more, and that's where things get exciting. The key reason is errors and rare varieties that slipped through during the mint's rush to produce coins. One of the most famous and valuable varieties connected to this year is the 1964 double die obverse penny. A double die happens when the coin die receives a misaligned impression during manufacturing, causing parts of the design to appear doubled on the finished coin. On rare 1964 double die cents, you can see noticeable doubling on the words Liberty and In God We Trust, as well as in the date. These coins were not supposed to exist, and only a small number escaped into circulation before the mint noticed the mistake. Today, authentic examples of the 1964 double die penny can sell for thousands of dollars depending on condition. Another highly sought-after variety involves off-metal errors. Occasionally, a penny planchet meant for another coin type or composition was accidentally struck with a Lincoln cent design. For example, there are rare reports of 1964 pennies struck on silver planchets or foreign coin blanks. These errors are extremely scarce and can command eye-opening prices at auction. Then there are dramatic mint errors like off-center strikes, broad strikes, clip planchets, and coins struck through grease or debris. While many error coins are minor, some 1964 examples show such strong visual distortions that collectors eagerly compete to own them. Condition also plays a huge role in value. A worn 1964 penny pulled from circulation might be worth only face value or a few cents. But a coin preserved in brilliant uncirculated condition, with full red color and sharp details, can be worth significantly more. Coins graded MS67 or higher by professional grading services can sell for hundreds or even thousands of dollars, especially if they show exceptional eye appeal. Let's talk real numbers. In recent auctions, Standard 1964 Lincoln cents graded in top condition have sold for several $100s. A 1964 double-die obverse penny has sold for over $4,000 in strong mint state condition. Some rare arrow strikes from this year have reached prices above $10,000, depending on the severity and uniqueness of the error. These aren't myths or internet rumors. These are documented sales from major coin auctions and certified grading companies. And that's what keeps collectors searching through rolls of pennies even today, hoping to uncover one of these hidden gems. So how can you tell if your 1964 penny might be special? First, look under the date. If there is no letter, that's correct. Philadelphia pennies had no mint mark in 1964. Next, examine the words Liberty and In God We Trust. If they appear thick, doubled, or shadowed, especially under magnification, you may be looking at a double-die variety. Check the date itself. Doubling in the numbers, especially the 1, 9, or 6, is another clue. Be careful, though. Machine doubling, which is common and not valuable, can look similar but usually appears flat and shelf-like, rather than rounded and raised. Next, weigh the coin. A normal 1964 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams. If it weighs significantly more or less, it might be struck on the wrong planchet. Also look at the edge. It should be smooth, not reeded or irregular. If the coin appears off-center, unusually shaped, or missing part of the design, it could be a mint error. In that case, it's best to have it authenticated by a professional grading service before selling or handling it further. One important warning: never clean your coin. Cleaning can permanently damage the surface and reduce its value dramatically, even if it's a rare variety. Collectors want coins in original condition, even if they show age or toning. Now here's something surprising. Despite the massive mintage, the 1964 penny holds a special place in American history because it was struck during the final years before major coinage changes. Just a year later, in 1965, the U.S. removed silver from dimes and quarters entirely. The coin shortage of the early 1960s led directly to one of the most significant changes in U.S. coin composition ever. Another fun fact is that the mint continued striking coins dated 1964 well into 1966, even after the calendar year had ended. This was done to discourage hoarding and stabilize coin circulation. So some 1964 pennies were actually produced later than you might expect, making them part of a fascinating transitional period in American coin history. Collectors also love the 1964 penny because it represents the final era of classic copper cents before inflation and metal costs eventually forced the mint to change compositions in the 1980s. There's something deeply nostalgic about the weight, color, and sound of a real copper penny, and the 1964 issue is one of the most accessible examples from that era. Another surprising detail is just how many rare coins are still undiscovered. Because billions of these pennies were minted, many remain in circulation, tucked into jars, drawers, and inherited collections. Every year, collectors report new discoveries of doubled dies and unusual errors that had gone unnoticed for decades. That means the story of the 1964 penny is still being written. For beginners, this coin is also a perfect entry point into collecting. It's easy to find, inexpensive in most grades, and offers the thrill of searching for rare varieties. You don't need expensive equipment or expert knowledge to start. Just a magnifying glass, a scale, and patience can turn an ordinary afternoon into a treasure hunt. For advanced collectors, high-grade examples and rare errors represent serious investment opportunities. Certified coins with strong eye appeal continue to rise in value as demand grows and supply tightens. Once a rare variety is recognized and cataloged, the number of known examples often stays fixed, making each one more desirable over time. And then there's the emotional side. Coins like the 1964 penny connect us to everyday American life in the past. This was the year people watched the Beatles on television for the first time, saw the Civil Rights Act signed into law, and lived through one of the most transformative periods in modern history. These pennies passed through the hands of factory workers, students, soldiers, and families across the country. Each one carries a silent story. So why does the 1964 no-mint mark Lincoln penny still matter today? Because it reminds us that value isn't always obvious. Something small, common, and overlooked can hold hidden importance. Most of these pennies are worth only a cent, but a few are worth thousands. And the only way to know which one you have is to look close. Most people would walk right past this penny without a second glance. But what if I told you that one small detail on a 1960 Lincoln cent could make it worth hundreds, even thousands of dollars? And in rare cases, collectors have fought over examples like this at auction. Today, we're uncovering the surprising story behind the 1960 Lincoln penny, a coin that looks ordinary but hides some extraordinary secrets. The 1960 Lincoln penny is a 1-cent coin struck at the Denver Mint in 1960. The small letter D, just below the date on the front of the coin, tells us where it was made. It carries the familiar image of Abraham Lincoln on the front and the Lincoln Memorial on the back, a design most Americans grew up seeing in their change. But this particular year holds a special place in coin history because it marks a moment of transition, experimentation, and hidden rarity that still excites collectors today. To understand why the 1960 penny matters, we have to go back to the late 1950s and early 1960s. America was changing fast. The country was deep into the Cold War, the space race was heating up, and everyday life was shifting in ways big and small. At the same time, the U.S. Mint was facing growing demand for coins. Vending machines were everywhere, businesses needed more change, and millions of Americans used pennies daily for newspapers, candy, parking meters, and phone calls. The Lincoln cent design itself had already been around for more than 50 years by 1960. It was first introduced in 1909 to honor the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, making it the first U.S. coin to feature a real historical figure instead of a symbolic image like Liberty. By 1959, the Mint updated the back of the penny from wheat stalks to the Lincoln Memorial, creating the design used in 1960. So the 1960 penny belongs to the early years of this newer memorial style, a time when the Mint was still refining how the coins looked and were made. In 1960, the Denver Mint produced more than 1 billion pennies. That's over 1 billion coins with that tiny D beneath the date. At first glance, that huge number might make the coin seem common and unimportant, and in most cases it is. Many 1960 pennies are only worth face value today. But the real story begins when we look closer at the metal, the design details, and especially the mistakes that slipped past quality control. The 1960 Lincoln penny is made mostly of copper. Specifically, it contains about 95% copper and 5% zinc and tin. That gives it the warm, reddish-brown color many people associate with older pennies. This composition would remain until 1982, when the Mint switched to cheaper zinc-based pennies coated in copper. So the 1960 penny belongs to what collectors call the classic copper era, and that alone makes it more appealing than modern cents. On the front or obverse, you see Abraham Lincoln facing right, with the word Liberty to the left and the date 1960 to the right. Below the date is the small D mint mark, showing it was made in Denver. On the back or reverse, you see the Lincoln Memorial, with the words United States of America across the top, EPLURIBUSUNUM above the building, and 1 cent along the bottom. If you look closely at the memorial, you can even see a tiny statue of Lincoln sitting inside, a remarkable level of detail for such a small coin. Now here's where things get interesting. The year 1960 is famous among collectors for one major reason. The U.S. Mint used 2 different styles of date that year, Some pennies have what's called a small date, while others have a large date. The difference is subtle, but once you know what to look for, it's unmistakable. On the small date version, the numbers in 1960 appear thinner and more delicate, especially the 6 and the 0. On the large date version, the numbers are bolder and more rounded. This date variation alone makes 1960 pennies exciting, because not all versions were made in equal numbers, and some combinations are much harder to find in high condition. While both small date and large date versions exist for Philadelphia and Denver issues, collectors pay special attention to well-preserved examples, especially those with sharp details, bright color, and clean surfaces. But the real stars of the 1960 penny story are the errors, the mistakes that turned ordinary coins into rare treasures. One of the most famous is the repunched mint mark. In the past, mint marks were punched into coin dies by hand. Sometimes, the worker would punch the letter more than once, leaving a doubled or slightly shifted image. On some 1960 pennies, you can see a D that looks doubled or shadowed, creating what collectors call a repunched mint mark. These varieties are much scarcer than normal coins and can be worth significantly more. Another error collectors hunt for is doubling in the lettering or date. This happens when the coin die shifts slightly during the manufacturing process, creating a doubled image on the coin itself. True doubled dies are rare and highly prized, especially when the doubling is strong and easy to see with the naked eye. While most 1960 pennies do not have dramatic doubling, a small number do, and those are among the most valuable examples from this year. There are also off-center strikes, where the coin was not properly aligned when struck, leaving part of the design missing. Some coins were struck on the wrong metal planchet, though this is extremely rare for pennies of this era, and some show dramatic die cracks or die breaks, where cracks in the metal die transferred raised lines or blobs onto the coin. All of these errors transform a simple 1-cent piece into a collectible with a story. So why is the 1960 penny considered rare or valuable? The answer depends on condition and variety. In worn condition, most 1960 pennies are only worth 1 cent. In lightly worn condition, maybe 2 or 3 cents. But in uncirculated condition, meaning the coin never entered circulation and still shows full mint luster, values rise quickly. A bright, sharply struck 1960 penny can sell for several dollars. High-grade examples, especially those graded by professional services, can sell for tens or even hundreds of dollars. The real money, though, comes from rare varieties and top-condition examples. A high-grade 1960 small date penny, for example, can command strong prices, especially if it has blazing red color with no spots or wear. Repunched mint mark varieties can sell for anywhere from $25 to several $100 depending on clarity and condition. Dramatic error coins, such as major off-center strikes or strong double dies, can reach into the hundreds or even thousands. There are real auction stories that prove this. In one case, a pristine 1960 Lincoln cent graded at the very top of the scale sold at auction for over $1,000. That's $1,000 for a coin that originally bought almost nothing. Other error examples, especially those with dramatic mint mistakes, have sold for several $100s each. These sales show that even modern-looking pennies can hold serious value when the right conditions come together. But how do you tell if you have a real one and not a damaged or altered coin? First, look at the basics. A genuine 1960 penny should weigh about 3.11 grams and stick to a magnet only if there's something wrong, because copper is not magnetic. The color should look natural, not plated or oddly shiny. The edges should be smooth with no seams. Next, examine the mint mark. On real coins, the D will look like part of the design, not scratched in or glued on. If the mint mark looks uneven, raised oddly, or mismatched in style, it may be altered. Collectors sometimes try to add mint marks to common coins to fake rarer versions, But under magnification, these fakes usually look crude and unnatural. If you suspect a repunched mint mark or doubled die, use a magnifying glass or a coin loop. Look for clear doubling that appears raised in part of the coin's surface, not flat like damage or wear. True mint errors will look smooth and integrated into the design, while post-mint damage often looks rough, scraped, or irregular. For valuable coins, professional authentication is always recommended. Third-party grading services can confirm whether a coin is genuine, identify varieties, and assign an official grade that helps establish market value. This protects both buyers and sellers and gives collectors confidence in what they're holding. Now let's talk about some fun and surprising facts about the 1960 penny. First, this coin comes from the first full year after the Lincoln Memorial Reverse was introduced in 1959. That makes it part of a major design shift in U.S. coinage history. Second, because over a billion were minted, many Americans today unknowingly own at least one 1960 penny, often tucked away in jars, drawers, or old piggy banks. Third, the copper in a single penny from this era is sometimes worth close to its face value by itself, especially when copper prices rise. Though melting pennies is illegal, the metal value adds another layer of interest. Another fascinating detail is how collectors learn to distinguish the small date and large date varieties. Early on, many people didn't even notice the difference. It wasn't until careful collectors compared thousands of coins side by side that the variation became widely recognized. Today, that subtle change in the shape of the numbers can be the difference between a common cent and a valuable one. There's also something deeply nostalgic about this coin. The year 1960 sits at the edge of two eras, the end of the 1950s optimism and the beginning of the turbulent 1960s. These pennies passed through the hands of people during the Kennedy presidency, the civil rights movement, and the early days of the space age. Each one quietly witnessed history, buying candy bars, newspapers, or parking time, while the world around it changed. Collectors love the 1960 penny today because it offers something for everyone. Beginners can easily find examples and start learning about condition, luster, and design details. More advanced collectors can hunt for small date varieties, repunched mint marks, and high-grade examples. Error collectors can search for off-center strikes, doubled dies, and other production mistakes. And investors appreciate the fact that top-condition copper cents from this era continue to rise in value over time. There's also the thrill of the hunt. Unlike ultra-rare gold coins locked away in vaults, the 1960 penny can still be found in everyday places: old coin jars, inherited collections, estate sales, or rolls from the bank. That means anyone, anywhere, could potentially discover one of these valuable varieties without spending a fortune up front. That possibility is what keeps people searching, sorting, and checking their change. And maybe the most powerful part of this story is how it reminds us that value isn't always obvious. A coin that looks ordinary, worn, and forgotten can sometimes carry a hidden rarity or historical significance that transforms it into something special. The 1960 penny teaches us that small details matter. A tiny letter, a subtle shape in a date, or a barely visible doubling can completely change a coin's story. So the next time you see a brownish copper penny with a D under the date and the year 1960, don't dismiss it. Take a closer look. Check the shape of the numbers. Examine the mint mark. Look for doubling, cracks, or unusual features. That little coin might just be a piece of American history and possibly a small treasure hiding in plain sight. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't told by gold or silver, but by a single cent that survived decades of everyday use, quietly waiting for someone curious enough to notice it. And that's the real magic of the 1960 Lincoln penny.